2009 seems like a watershed year for some of the reasons that Tim has already mentioned. It's also clearly a watershed year for the journalism industry. And the president last week finished his speech to the White House Correspondents' Center. Hey, wasn't he funny? Funny, President? Yeah, it was great. But he finishes on this upraised tone, offering his thanks and support to journalists, the people who cover him in the White House. And he says, they're extraordinary, hardworking journalists who lost their jobs in recent months. Papers are struggling to stay open. I may not agree with everything you write or report, but I do so with the knowledge that when you are at your best, I am at my best. And he gets a standing ovation, you know, clearly a connection with something the president cares deeply about. But in the meantime, the Rocky Mountain News has closed, the Seattle Post-Intelligencer went online, the San Francisco Chronicle is on rocky ground unless it can cut its losses. The New York Times, you've all read, has been trying to figure out what to do with the Boston Globe, and on and on and on. And reporters are worried, and they're looking for a plan B. Editors are worried too. The whole construct is worried. And it's not immediately apparent what that plan B is. Jeff Jarvis, probably many of you know him, writes very knowledgeably about this shift of news. He's let us know that people in the online generation believe that news just comes to them, that it will find them if it's interesting enough and important enough. They're not relying on traditional media sources. And there's no scarcity of information online. Lawyers have the same problem. We used to be able to make money as lawyers by purveying information, by being the sources of authoritative information. Now information is everywhere, and it's not as apparent that a business model built on purveying information will be sustainable. And this kind of disintermediation has happened to lawyers as well. They've had to learn how to become much more like skilled counsels and gatherers than just purveyors. And the common wisdom these days is that newspapers and lawyers can be curating, in a sense, wise curators. They can be radar screens. That's an image I particularly like, understanding when a news story is actually becoming news visually is something that an editor can do, and normal human beings like the rest of us won't know. It's very hard to synthesize a nose for news. That's something that comes from a lot of training and being part of a news industry. These organizations have very strong brands, many of them, that can be used as new kinds of platforms. They can collaborate with outsiders to do hyper-local reporting. This is a particularly exciting development, saying, come on in, The Guardian is doing this, Jeff reports, come on in and help us write about your neighborhood in a really authoritative way. They can face this new economic competition, we can believe optimistically, and survive. But as Clay Shirky says, we have no idea what is coming next, and Tim has just said, and we have no idea what's coming next with regulation either. It seems as if networks of newspapers may be necessary. There's some people, Steve Brill and others, working on that business model. New ecosystems may need to arise. What's government's role? Well, it seems as if a very important thing government can do is make its information easily available, easily linkable, easily findable, so that everyone can write about it. And this is a very important initiative of the Obama administration. So, just to sum up this first part here, there's this very common set of moves, and it's one that I support. Decry the state of journalism. Say how loyal you are to journalism. One of the happiest summers of my life was spent at the New York Times. They hired one cub lawyer for no particular reason, and I got to go to first page meetings and meet the guys in the basement who run the press. It was totally exciting. And every day I would walk towards the New York Times building and say, make me competent. I just want to be competent. I feel the same way approaching the White House every day. Just make me competent. I want to do the best possible job I can. So I have a lot of loyalty to news organizations, and I know that President Obama does too. So then the next move is, well, let's suggest a set of steps that may make it possible for some form of journalism to survive. Think about what form, if any, government intervention might take. Maybe it's just tools and platforms and information, who knows? and suggest to reporters, all your friends who are reporters, that go ahead, develop your individual brand. Have a brand, go out there, be a presence. Meanwhile, the poor reporters are just trying to file their stories and move on with their lives in the face of many, many layoffs. So it's an extremely difficult time. Are there bright spots? Well, I don't know if this qualifies as a bright spot, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. Twitter. The number of visitors to Twitter jumped enormously. In March, 131% to 9.3 million visitors. That's 5 million more than in February. But that's nothing compared to the jump between March and April. 19.4 million unique visitors went to Twitter last month, more than double the previous month. That's a lot of tweets. But here's why this is significant for this particular conversation. The average Twitter user is 2 to 3 times more likely to go to online news sources than the average Joe online. So, for example, let's say 17% of the total U.S. internet audience visited CNN.com in March. More than double that percentage of Twitter.com visitors did so. And we hope that they're going to independent voices, blogging voices, as well as major media. But we know they're curious, and we know there are lots of them, and they're engaging socially. So there's some brightness there. We'll have to figure out what that is. Meanwhile, my cohort is wildly joining Facebook. All of my friends, all the people my age, have decided that Facebook is the place to be, and we're joining up in tremendous numbers. In these very last few months, this is happening. So those people are also more likely to visit online news or to be tugged by their friends over to online news sources. So I'm hoping they'll visit small and large sources of news, not just the large major media brands, although I love the New York Times. And perhaps we can draw from this that we're heading towards a bright, although unknown journalism future. Let's just be optimistic that the boundaries will be different, that the newspaper won't hit our doorstep the way it does right now, another event that I am very fond of and I'll miss when that stops. There will be tremendous consolidation, and we should worry about that. But there still will be news, just a different form, maybe aggregation, curation, and more people involved in its creation. But there are barriers here. We know news is essential, and we know that it's moving online, but who's going to be able to read and generate news and watch online in America? We need to look at who is online in 21st century America. These things really go together. So we know that only 57% of Americans have broadband at home. That leaves 34% without, and about 9% using dial-up still. There's a tremendous demographic divide. Only 35% of homes with less than $50,000 in annual income have broadband. 76% of households earning more than $50,000 a year are connected. There's a racial divide. Only 40% of minority homes are connected versus 55% of whites. There's a huge rural divide, and one that the stimulus program is obviously aimed at in broadband. Only 39% of rural households subscribe to broadband. Nearly 20 million Americans live in areas that aren't served by a single broadband provider. And tens of millions more live in places where there's at most a single provider for high-speed access. You've all heard the stories. The U.S. used to be way up on the ranks of broadband adoption. Now we have been thoroughly surpassed by our European and Asian counterparts. And the price differential is really something. The average broadband offering in Japan is 10 times faster than the average service available in the US, half the cost. Residents of Tokyo can purchase speeds that are 100 times greater downstream and 1,000 times greater upstream than those in San Francisco for a lower price. It just goes on and on. So in Japan, 150 megabits per second download. Broadband is $60 a month. In London, you can get 8 megabits a second for $9 a month, but we here in America are paying $53 for an average speed of 4.9 megabits per second. So I am delighted that Chairman Copps has kicked off this long-awaited, long-overdue effort to have a national broadband plan in this country. Many other countries have gone ahead of us and created policies for broadband. It's our turn. It's our time. It would have been good if the last administration had worked on a national broadband plan. They didn't. Now it's up to us. And I assure you that the administration at the highest levels really is interested in broadband and cares about this National Broadband Plan and wants to engage. The comments to the FCC are all due June 8th, so get them in, write to us, write to them, tell us what's going on. So I'm delighted about the kickoff of that plan. I can't wait for the aggregation of data and knowledge and impetus, really leadership, that's going to come out of that National Broadband Plan. The FCC is also asking questions about things like what minimal speed will make sense for broadband. Should we think about, this is the peanut butter analogy people use a lot. Should we just spread peanut butter across the country so everybody has basic wireless access? Would that be the right direction? It might be. But I think an answer to the question of what speed is essential is it depends. It depends. It depends what application you want to use. It really may matter for this news making and generating function as well. So for example, if you're in a doctor's clinic, high speed is going to mean at least 100 megabits a second. That's what you're going to need, and preferably a gigabit per second so that you can transmit CT scans in real time, get data out there very quickly for the uses of your practice. It's just, I think it's pretty obvious that 3 megabits per second is not functionally equivalent to 100 megabits per second, and some businesses are going to need higher speeds. Just ask, I love this story, the city of Lafayette, Louisiana, where the citizens overwhelmingly voted for 100 megabits per second fiber, approving $125 million in bonds to enable the Lafayette utility system to build a fiber optic network to every home and business. They're still working on rolling it out, but they voted for it. They didn't want slow broadband in their neighborhood. And some people say that even though it's only reached about half of city residents so far, they've already brought new private sector businesses and new competition in the last mile from both cable and wireless broadband providers. That's quite an inspiring story. So our president is so good at moving us and making us think about issues and ideas that are greater than ourselves, constantly challenging us to look onward and upward and forward. And I'd like to do that with high-speed broadband today. Just for a moment, think about heart disease, all right? Heart disease and broadband. It's the #1 killer worldwide. Each year, millions of Americans go to the doctor with symptoms of heart disease, and the severity of restrictions in the coronary arteries is difficult to measure. It's hard to see how quickly blood is flowing, how much restriction there is in a coronary artery. Imagine a doctor, a whole ecosystem with high-speed broadband, able to use CT scans, some visualization techniques and computation in the cloud, able to determine blood flow in a patient's coronary arteries without doing invasive surgery, without doing an angiogram. That's pretty exciting. So before now, the only way to get that information would be to dig in and find out exactly what's going on with that blood flow. But by using these imaging technologies and with the aid of high-speed broadband and some software and some CT scanners, we could reduce healthcare costs substantially. We'd need to have ubiquitous broadband to make this work, to medical institutions, to patients, to providers. But we'd end up with an entirely new method of diagnosing cardiac disease with an ecosystem of high-speed broadband to the right nodes, the players in this particular system. Or distance learning, another wonderful thing to think about for our future. There was a great story earlier this week about a University of Texas distance learning program. It helps migrant students graduate from high school. So they've been wandering around from school to school. They have to follow their parents in the crops, hard for them to finish high school. And the program helps them earn high school credit wherever they are by logging onto a computer, taking a few courses, and moving on. And the story focuses on a guy named Alexis Fernandez, who graduated from high school with the aid of this program, even though he had attended 10 elementary and secondary schools. He'd been all over the place in his young life. There are many programs like this across the country. Just imagine what routinely available higher speeds could mean for younger students and for adults who want to complete their education and want to be able to interact with a professor. Imagine distance learning where the distance is actually eliminated, where you're able to feel part of the experience of a classroom without leaving your job, leaving your family, and putting at risk your other responsibilities in life. That's a tremendous vision, and one that ubiquitous high-speed broadband could make possible. Alexis Fernandez, now he's studying engineering at UT, and he says he never wants to go back to the fields again, and this program made it possible. Or here's another inspiring story. I was visited by Chris Vane, who's the CIO of the city of San Francisco, and he sees that kids in public housing need better educational opportunities, and he sees that there are amazing informational resources in San Francisco. He sees that kids are very comfortable with the gaming interface where they interact through an avatar, and he sees an opportunity. And for some time now, the city of San Francisco, under Chris Vane's direction, has been creating a network of community networks, fiber networks going out to public housing, running city fiber to over 5,000 federally funded low-income housing units. Chris Vane sees a quality of life improvement. It's not just speed for him, it's actually changing the lives of these kids. And so what he's doing is creating an open gaming style platform where the city's museums will create courseware that'll be very interesting to the kids about the environment, about art, or whatever they want to learn about, and will come into the public housing units, and then the kids get to deal with it in sort of matrix style, bringing pictures around. You feel very authoritative. There goes my course, goes to the side. And I'm focusing on these materials. Meanwhile, there's a chat going on over here. It's an immersive environment for learning that the city of San Francisco is making possible, and it would not work without high-speed broadband in place. And with it, it transforms the lives of the kids who are there, part of an ecosystem of learning that before was closed to them. So when you see this new platform, you'll be blown away. Really, it's amazing. And we hope the kids will too. So broadband. It's the new essential infrastructure. It's true that access to broadband doesn't guarantee economic success, but lack of access to broadband will guarantee economic stagnation and decline. And I'm very much looking forward to the work that the administration will carry out on the National Broadband Plan in partnership with the FCC. The president mentions broadband all the time. It's a good sign. He's also mentioning newspapers all the time these days. And these two futures, I think, go together. And I think there's some light at the end of the tunnel for both of them. It's not going to be easy. And I wish you all success with this meeting and all success in your direction on the various media policies that you care about. And I assure you the administration takes an interest. Thank you all very much.